You're listening to the main event with Zach Gelb and Mike Zahn on WHIP.
Welcome back, everybody. 215-204-WHIP is our number. This is the main event. Zach Gelb and Mike Zahn here with you on a football Friday. The Eagles look to improve their record of 1-3 this Sunday at the Link, and they welcome in Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints. That game will be at 1 o'clock at Lincoln Financial Field on Sunday. So let's go down south right now and welcome in the Saints radio color analyst, and that is our good friend Hokie Gajan. Hokie, thanks for a few minutes. How are you?
No problem, guys.
Well,
how y'all doing this morning?
We're doing great, and we appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. This Saints offense, they're 19th in the league in points. They have a top 5 quarterback in Drew Brees, and they have a top 5 passing offense. But then on the ground, they haven't been able to establish success this year. How do you view the Saints offense so far through the first 4 games of the season?
Well, it's not the offense that we've come to expect in the past where, they've always been in the top 5 of the league. And to be honest with you, I don't understand how they're that high in their passing because they don't really have any threats on the outside. I mean, it's a pretty pedestrian passing game. Really, the only threat you've got is Brandon Cooks, and teams have seemed to taken him away. And then, you don't have Jimmy Graham anymore, and you don't have Kenny Stills. And the running game was something that Sean Payton addressed in the offseason and said he was going to improve it and, need to stick to it more. But yet it kind of looks like reverting back to old habits, just not trying to run the football, and therefore they don't do it very well.
Jimmy Graham was such a special story. Came out of nowhere, played basketball at the U, and then went on to dominate in the NFL. He's the second best tight end in the league behind Rob Gronkowski. And there was such great synergy between Graham and Brees, and there was just so many special plays all those years. Why did they get rid of him? Why did they trade him to Seattle?
That's a question that's been going around here pretty often ever since they let him go. I don't know if Jimmy got hurt last year. I think it was in the Tampa game. It was about the 3rd game of the season down in the Superdome, hurt his shoulder. And, you could tell that at times that it was really bothering him. He couldn't stretch out to try and go for a ball over his head or down in the dirt, something like that. And then there were some issues that came up about problems in the locker room. Nobody ever specifically named him, but it was a name that kind of floated around with a few others. Now, how true any of that crap is, I don't really know. But for whatever reason, it went sour. And, it's certainly not between Drew and Jimmy, but just somehow with the organization. Maybe it was, a couple of years ago when he was trying to get, the arbitrator to say that he was a receiver instead of a tight end. There are a lot of different things that you could kind of try and put a piece of a puzzle together and say this is what it was, but maybe it's the accumulation of some of it. Maybe it was none of it. It's really hard to know, but I think it's pretty obvious right now that they do miss him.
And Drew Brees is one of the best players in the NFL. He's just such an amazing quarterback, and I know he has that shoulder injuries. You follow this team a whole lot more than we do. Did he ever open up and talk about Jimmy Graham leaving?
No. And he probably never will until, I don't know, maybe he writes a book 20 years after his retirement or something. That's one thing about this Saints organization, coaches, players, they keep things like injuries, personal issues, something like the Jimmy Graham trade. They keep that stuff close to the vest, and they don't let anything out. So, maybe if, somebody gets let go here in the next year or so that has an axe to grind with the organization, they may come out and say it. But, then the Saints could easily turn that back around on him and say, well, this guy's an offensive or defensive lineman or whatever position, and say, how much does he know about, what we thought about Jimmy Graham? So, no, I don't look for Drew to say anything until, way down the line, if there is anything, in fact, to say.
We're talking to the color analyst for the New Orleans Saints radio network, Hokie Gajan. And Hokie, this NFC South division entering the season, all the experts, everyone was coming out saying, okay, whoever wins 6-7 games first wins this division. Suddenly, this is one of the tougher divisions in the entire NFL, especially with the top 2 teams. What do the Saints need to do if they want to reclaim this division?
Ooh, that's going to be a tough one because, really, if you look at the Saints team, they just don't have a lot of depth, and really, even their starting 22 is not what you'd call a bunch of good players. We've sat around and had this discussion before that, with the exception of Drew Brees, and there's even 10 teams out there that don't need him, but you could go to the other 31 teams and say you can have anybody on this roster, anybody, and I don't know that they would look at that very hard, and they might say, well, what's it going to cost me? But there's not a single player that you just say, yeah, I got to go in there and snatch that guy up. So in that regard, the Saints are going to have to rely on Atlanta and Carolina to, not just stub their toe, but break it, get a bad case of turf toe or something, because it doesn't look like they're coming back to the pack. And I just don't see the Saints as a team that has the talent to really string together 5 or 6 wins together to close this gap. And really, out of the two, I'm a lot more impressed with Atlanta than I am Carolina. So, I'm not crowning them the champions just yet, but they look pretty hard to beat, at least from the Saints standpoint.
Well, you talk about there's not a lot of depth on this New Orleans team, but there is a nice new addition of C.J. Spiller, who had a great week last week, a nice run to end that game. What do you think C.J. Spiller does for this run game, especially how does he help complement Ingram?
Well, that's the whole thing, is that he's been hurt so much, and I think that was even a little bit of his reputation when he was up in Buffalo, is that he is a little bit injury prone, and he came in and was having a good training camp, and then all of a sudden this knee injury popped up that nobody knew anything about, and had to find out on Facebook or Instagram or something that he was down in Florida recovering. And since he's been able to get back, Sean Payton has slowly got him back into the offense. But as far as helping in the running game, I mean, there again, you look at the Saints' rushing attack over the last 5 years, and they don't really have one guy that they feed it to. It's they do it by committee, and right now it's between Mark Ingram, Kyrie Robinson, and C.J. Spiller. So I don't know if you're really going to see C.J. get involved in the running game all that much, but I think you will see him get more involved in the passing game, because that's an area where Sean Payton can use some creativity and get him matched up where he's going against guys in space. And then, really we saw the first flash of what C.J. Spiller could do on that 80-yard run. So going here forward, I would think that you'd probably look for Sean Payton to try and get him the ball more so in the passing game than you would the running game.
Every fan and everyone in the media loves to compare players to other players, and whether it's, Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. I think another person who's added in that group is Drew Brees. What does he need to do to make sure that he doesn't fall out of that top upper echelon group?
Well, the offensive line has definitely got to play better. Early in the season, he was getting a lot of pressure, a lot of hurries, and getting knocked down a lot. And I guess we were just so spoiled for so many years that Drew had never missed a start because of an injury, and the shoulder issue popped up, and I thought Luke McCown did a heck of a job in his replacement. But the offensive line has got to get better, and they're even banged up now with Teron Armstead, their left tackle, who, well, he would be one of those guys I think that a lot of teams would be interested in if you just throw him out there on the market. So, I think he's a top-notch left tackle in this league. But the other members of the offensive line are either getting old or they're banged up, and they're just going to have to find a way to protect Drew Brees. I mean, I think Drew can still do it, but he's got to have the time. And unfortunately, just like any other quarterback, when he's getting flushed a lot and getting hurried in the pocket, he's not nearly as effective as when he stays fairly clean. So I think the offensive line has got to improve their play.
Hokie Gajan joins us, and we know football is won in the trenches, and this Eagles offensive line has been a disaster through the first 4 games of the season, and they're a banged-up unit. As you know, Jason Peters is going to play this week, so is Lane Johnson, but they're not 110% healthy. The Saints defense isn't really good, but do you have any confidence going up against this weak Eagles offensive line that the Saints could get it going this week defensively?
I mean, I think it's going to have to be one of those things that they're going to have to show it to me before I believe it. It's been an issue the last couple of years. They do struggle to put pressure on the quarterback, even when they had Junior Galette here. He was good for 10, 12 sacks a season, but he's not a guy that the offense really accounted for. And again, they just don't have those studs on the defensive line. They don't have that one guy that can really get off, tee off and go get the quarterback. They don't have anybody that you say, boy, this guy's really stout against the run. So I would think that in that regard that, the Eagles fans should feel pretty good about going against the Saints defensive line this week, because it's a unit that's, to be perfectly honest with you, just not very good.
The way I assess the Eagles fans here in Philadelphia, they're really good fans, and I know nationally they don't get the respect that they deserve because all the other crap that goes on off the field. But they're frustrated right now because this was an Eagles team that was expected to win 11, 12 games in some fans' minds before the year. And Chip Kelly has been very stubborn, and he hasn't adjusted his ways. The offensive line's been horrendous, and he made that big power play to be the both the GM and the head coach. You're an outsider. You don't live here in Philadelphia. How's Chip Kelly perceived down there in New Orleans?
Well, that's kind of it's really kind of hard to say, because I think a lot of people, even when Chip Kelly made those moves, that it probably half the people raised their eyebrows in concern, and the other half was like, well, look who he replaced him with. I mean, at least from an outsider looking in, if you tell me that you're replacing LaShawn McCoy with DeMarco Murray, I'm saying, that's not a bad swap right there. Foles for Sam Bradford. I did like the way Foles ran that offense, but I don't know enough about that particular offense to know how. To me, it always seemed like the tempo and getting up to the line of scrimmage, and let's tucker out the other team, one thing or another. But to be honest, down here, especially the way the Saints are playing right now, that I guess the Saints fans down here are hoping, if he is screwing it up, that he continues to do so, that we can get a win this Sunday. Because, I mean, this ain't a guarantee for the Saints to walk in there and get a win just because Philadelphia's not playing very well.
Wrapping up with the Saints radio color analyst, that's Hokie Gajan. You guys, here in Philadelphia, we have some former Saints players in Darren Sproles and Malcolm Jenkins. Jenkins is a tremendous leader, and I call Sproles the Energizer Bunny, because whenever this team looks down and out, he just finds a way to pick it up, if it's in a special teams play or even on a draw. What do you remember about those two players, though, with their time with the Saints?
Just exactly what you just said. Now, Darren Sproles and Drew Brees had a relationship before, because out there in San Diego, and Drew continues to go out there every year to train in the off season. So he still does a lot of training with Darren Sproles, and Sproles could do exactly the same thing around here. Run a draw, a screen pass, return a punt or a kickoff. He just had a way of getting that spark, getting the team going. He is a guy that I think that they regret letting go, and I also think they regret letting Malcolm go because of his leadership abilities. Malcolm was never the kind of guy to make big game-changing play defensively, not for the Saints, but, I mean, just so well respected in the locker room, was smart, could play multiple positions in the secondary, and I think they might have underestimated his value to their defense in that regard. And like I say, now that it's all over and done with, I think that's two decisions that they regret making. But I remember both of those guys for doing just exactly what you said.
This Saints team, they've had to survive a lot, and hey, they had to go through Bountygate, which was a whole bunch of nonsense in my opinion, and they won a Super Bowl, which many Saints fans didn't think was ever going to be able to be possible. And Loomis and Payton, they've had so much success, but it looks like they're going to have two back-to-back losing seasons, and all those players that we've mentioned that have changed teams, whether it's Graham, Sproles, or Jenkins, do you think there's any chance of those guys' jobs are on the hot seat? Are their jobs in jeopardy?
Man, that has already been brought up a little bit this year. It's kind of hard to say because, the Saints they're in such a salary cap situation down here that I guess maybe if Mr. Benson understands how much of a rebuilding year that this is, again, but for every year that they in rebuilding mode, that's another year that Drew Brees gets on his age and one thing and another. I mean, he's the guy that makes this whole thing go. So I think it would have to be a disastrous season. I think you can miss the playoffs, still be safe, but I don't think a 3-win season would be enough to salvage it. So if they could just have a mediocre year, I think they're safe for at least one more year. But if it's really disastrous and people quit showing up to the games, then yeah, I could see something happening.
Last time we had you on the show, you were telling us I think it was around Thanksgiving, and you were telling us about the fried turkey that's a really big hit down there in New Orleans. Make sure you get a cheesesteak when you're in Philadelphia. We appreciate a few minutes. Thanks so much.
Okay, guys, I appreciate it. Anytime.
There's Hokie Gajan from the Saints Radio Network. Does a tremendous job as their color analyst.